Folks, we have some exciting news. A few weeks ago, a 116-year-old submarine was refound in Long Island Sound near Old Saybrook in the mouth of the Connecticut River. I have been diving Long Island Sound for almost 45 years. This is hugely exciting news. These types of extraordinary finds are rare. This experimental submarine has been lost for almost 80 years. It makes me appreciate this body of water even more. Let's explore the history of this ill-fated vessel, the little sub that couldn't, and its trouble-plagued creator. The submarine is the experimental submarine, the Defender. The Defender was a 92-foot-long submarine built by the Lake Torpedo Company out of Bridgeport, Connecticut. The company was founded by Simon Lake, an inventor, mechanical engineer, and naval architect. He was born in 1866 in Pleasantville, New Jersey. He tried for several years to create a submarine that the U.S. Navy would buy en masse. In 1901, Lake opened a boatyard in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The Lake Torpedo Company was located on the peninsula between Johnson's Creek and Bridgeport Harbor. By 1914, his company was worth roughly $9 million, and he had $1.65 million in Navy contracts. Oddly, the Defender was still listed as unfinished. His first sub built in 1894 was the Argonaut Jr. It was wedge-shaped, made of wood, yellow pine, and had 3 wheels to keep it from getting stuck on the sea bottom. It was 14 feet long with a 4-foot beam and a depth of 5 feet. He built 2 more Argonauts. Argonaut 1 was built in 1897 in Baltimore and was 36 feet in length. Interestingly, it was the first known submarine capable of operating in the open ocean. He sailed it from Norfolk, Virginia to Sandy Hook in New Jersey. That sea trial led to rebuilding it into a 60-foot-long Argonaut 2. Her main attribute, like that of her preceding Argonauts, was a wet diving chamber that allowed a diver to leave and re-enter the submarine. The Navy still wasn't buying. A new prototype called the Protector was built in 1901. Again, the Navy wasn't interested. They had already been using the Holland-type sub and had no reason to take Lakes. However, both Japan and Russia were interested in the Protector. It was sold to Russia and shipped to St. Petersburg for use during the Russo-Japanese War. From St. Petersburg, it was transported 6,000 miles to Vladivostok. She had some success, and a total of 11 of these were built by the Newport News Shipbuilding Company and transported abroad. In late 1906, Simon Lake authorized the Newport News Shipbuilding Company in Virginia to build a boat called the Simon Lake X. This was in response to the 1906 Naval Appropriations Bill, which authorized the Secretary of the Navy to acquire up to $500,000 in submarines. A huge amount for that year. In 1907, Roosevelt then increased that to $3 million. Lake built the Simon Lake X with his own money in anticipation of a contract. In response, a competition was created by the Secretary of State, Victor Metcalf. Prior to the competition, the sub was renamed to simply the Lake. In April and May of 1901, the Lake went head-to-head with Electric Boat's new sub, the Octopus, later called the C-1 or S-9. The Lake was 92 feet long with a beam of 13 feet. She had a 200-ton displacement and a crew of 10. For armament, she had 3 457mm torpedo tubes. 2 of them were placed in the nose compartment and the 3rd in the stern. The Octopus was 105 feet in length, had a 14-foot beam, a draft of 11 feet, and displaced 275 tons. She could hit 11 knots on the surface and 9 submerged. Reportedly, she had a test depth of 200 feet. She had 2 torpedo tubes, carried 4 torpedoes, and had a crew of 15. Unlike other subs, the Lake had in between the nose torpedo tubes a narrow passage ending in a hatch. Leveraging a one-of-a-kind airlock system with an air compression tank modeled on one for a soda fountain compressor, a hatch cover opened to the outside and allowed the diver to exit the sub. The internal compartments of the submarine were protected from inflow of water on the same principle as a diving bell. This was a manifestation of Lake's obsession with underwater salvage. Well, Lake lost the competition. He got crushed. The Defender lost to the Octopus in nearly every category. The Octopus was faster while both on the surface and submerged. It was more stable while submerged and dove faster. The Defender did make a record dive to 136 feet, but the crew had major issues controlling her while submerged. The diving system with the midships diving planes simply did not work the way Lake had intended them to. The crew frequently lost control, and the boat accidentally breached the surface 12.5 times. The workload of the crew was also not very efficiently distributed. The captain had to handle the helm, the diving planes, and the ballast, all while trying to safely con the boat. He simply couldn't multitask at that level. The Navy's choice was clear. The Octopus won, and 4 more boats were ordered and built later that year to become part of the C-Class designation. While he couldn't challenge the test data and that his sub was inferior, he went after Electric Boat and sued them and Secretary of State Metcalf for malfeasance and corruption. Blake was upset with the exclusive award of additional submarine construction contracts solely to Electric Boat. He enlisted the help of 2 congressmen. This too failed miserably and almost had charges leveled against him and the congressman, highlighting the dubious and somewhat retributional nature of his suit. Still, he refused to give up on the boat. The Lake was brought to Lake's Bridgeport, Connecticut yard in 1907, and he attempted to correct its deficiencies. It received a new sharply raked and pointed bow, along with other alterations. He renamed it the Defender. What was done with the boat at this point is not entirely clear, but it remained under Lake ownership and was never commissioned into the Navy. The Navy wanted nothing to do with this boat. In late 1928, the boat was returned to the Bridgeport yard, where it was refitted as a salvage vessel. It was an attempt to revive Lake's pet concept of diver operations from a submerged submarine for mine clearance and salvage work. This too was plagued with issues. The Navy was not warm to the concept, so the Defender was offered to Sir Hubert Wilkins for his Arctic expedition. Wilkins, however, chose the larger O-12 SS-73, also built by the Lake Torpedo Company in 1916, citing the Defender's small size and underperformance. It wasn't all bad for Lake. His company built a total of 39 submarines, 26 of which went to the Navy. The rest were experimental or built for civilian use. One of his O-boats, you see here, the O-13, led to another wreck in Long Island Sound, off of Bridgeport, called the Mary Alice. I will leave a link for my video on that wreck. In June of 1929, the Defender participated in a salvage demonstration for the Navy off Block Island. The Navy was once again not impressed, and nothing came of it. Desperately trying to drum up publicity, Lake engaged Amelia Earhart, the famous aviator. Earhart actually made a dive in the boat and exited through the diving chamber and swam to the surface. Lake was committed to making the Defender a premier salvage vessel. In this depiction, they refer to sightseeing capability through planned viewing ports. Very Jules Verne. There are even more missing pieces to the story. In July 1933, it was reported that the Defender was to be sold at auction. That must not have happened, as Lake later used the Defender in an attempt to salvage reported gold from a sunken British frigate. The HMS Hussar, which sunk in 1780, was reportedly carrying $2 to $4 million in gold. In 1934, Lake began his quest for the Hussar in the East River. He worked Hell's Gate in his submarine for 2 years, and then the money began to run out. He was sued by a deckhand for ironically back pay of almost $400. On September 4th, 1936, Simon Lakes, on his 70th birthday, thought he found the Hussar. His auger-like probes came back with wood and chalk embedded on its coils, but it was not to be. No money was found. And, to boot, he was sued again. This time, his house was in foreclosure for the sum of $1,800. He lost his house in November of 1937 and gave up his search for the Hussar. The Defender returned again to New London. He died 1 year before the Defender was sunk. Simon Lake only admitted 2 failures in his life. One was the failed search for the Hussar's treasure, and the other was an unsuccessful effort in the Sunshine Homes Concrete Product Company, an effort to build inexpensive homes. That project forced him to sell his torpedo boat company just to pay off his debts. To me, Simon Lake is a bit of a tragic historical figure. While he obtained over 200 patents for advances in naval designs and was instrumental in the race to build the first American submarines, he's a bit of a forgotten figure. His financial failures in several side businesses and his inability to procure large-scale Navy contracts left him in the shadows of contemporary naval history. I think his obsession with salvage and building multi-purpose subs left him out of the Navy's scope. They simply wanted a more powerful attack submarine. It's a shame. His contribution to the development of the submarine is substantial. He was a pioneer. The Defender lingered at a dock in New London, reportedly sinking alongside of it several times. She was then finally abandoned on a mudflat near Old Saybrook. Sometime later, the Defender was finally pulled from that mudflat by the Army Corps of Engineers and, in 1946, scuttled out in Long Island Sound. She may have sunk prematurely, as the Navy usually likes to drop wrecks into deeper water. Based on the AWOS listings and NOAA charts I've scoured through, there is a dump site used for many years just beyond the Long Sand Shoal. This may have been the original target dump site. The depth in this area runs between 150 and 170 feet. After reviewing the AWOS listing showing known obstruction numbers, it looks to be closer inshore than reported. According to the divers that found her, Richard Simon, Stephen Abate, and Joe Marizani, she sits in roughly 150 feet of water. It's common practice for boat captains and divers to misrepresent depth and location to protect a wreck site, so I don't blame them if it is misrepresented. Based on their report, she sits mostly intact and sits on a gravelly seabed. She lists heavily to the starboard side. Her bow and stern are in good shape, hatch is still there, and propellers intact. The diving here can be tough. It's cold, dark, and you can get really bad currents. Visibility at 150 feet in Long Island Sound is tough. You're lucky if you get 3 to 5 feet. Well, that was a lot of fun. This is very exciting news. I can't wait to see more actual footage of the submarine underwater. There's no video, to my knowledge, as of this date, just still photos that I've seen in some local newspaper articles. I will leave a couple of links of those in the description. I do plan on diving this wreck if I ever get an opportunity. I mean, right in my own backyard. This really gets the exploration juices flowing, doesn't it? Stay tuned. I'm working on 4 more videos. They're taking a little longer than I anticipated, so please be patient with that. I hope you're enjoying your travels. Please be safe, and appropriately, as with this video, as always, go explore, get wet.